Are you confused about what's going on with the COVID booster shots? Well, join the club. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So in a continuation of what we've seen with the confused direction we've been getting from the FDA and the CDC and the other alphabet soup of scientific guidance regarding how we're supposed to behave in this COVID pandemic, an advisory board to the FDA just voted to say that everybody should not get booster shots. So what is going on here? Well, for starters, what we're seeing is science in action, and it isn't pretty sometimes. I should know. After all, I do have a PhD and I am a social scientist. And science, by definition, involves trying to explore things that we don't know the answer to. And when we're dealing with a novel disease, which is what COVID is, a new virus, and we have new tools available to us, in particular these mRNA vaccines that so many of us have already received, scientists can make predictions, but ultimately they need to wait for data to know which of their predictions are most strongly supported. Well, in this case, we have the race against time to try to stop the pandemic from spreading, while we also have the desire of scientists to wait until they have enough information to be able to make informed decisions. And that's a real challenge. Believe me, scientists, especially those dealing with the kind of life and death guidance that these members of the FDA panel are dealing with, are very aware of their responsibility to the public, and it weighs heavily upon them. To further complicate matters, you've got money involved, because of course Pfizer wants to sell as many of its vaccines as it possibly can, especially in light of the fact that it basically was developed with a lot of help from the federal government. This vaccine has the potential to turn into a real profit center for Pfizer. So if they can get people to take boosters in addition to getting the initial 2 shots, well, that's going to be a huge boon for them financially. Then to further complicate matters, you've got the political issues, which is that Biden wants to continue to be seen as making progress against the pandemic. And he's certainly been frustrated in that effort by the ideological efforts of some to cast doubt upon the efficacy of these vaccines. As I stated in another video that I'll link to up above, I strongly support President Biden's decision with the vaccine mandate, but he understands that politically he needs to keep showing progress, which is why they made the announcement about making boosters available to everybody. And then the third issue that we've got is that vaccines are limited, that there's a limited supply of them. And as a result, the fact that we here in the developed world, in the United States, are hoarding these vaccines, making sure that everybody gets not 1 shot, not 2 shots, but 3 shots, is going to be something that then makes it harder for other less developed countries to be able to access the vaccines. And you might say, well, who cares about that? But in this world, with all the connections that we've got, allowing the virus to run rampant in developing countries will only lead to the emergence of new mutations that ultimately will end up back here in the United States, potentially threatening our health here. So it's in the interest of the United States, and I give President Biden credit for recognizing this, but it's in the interest of the United States that we also support the vaccination of people everywhere in the world, not just here in the United States. And hoarding the vaccine here in the United States so that Americans are able to get booster shots on top of the 2 they've already received is something that's going to make that harder. Now, I'm not saying that getting a booster shot might not be something useful. And that's not, by the way, what the FDA advisory panel said. The FDA advisory panel said 2 things. Number 1, they said that people who are at higher risk of disease or at harm from COVID, or who by virtue of their job or position might be placed in greater danger of being a spreader of COVID, and that includes people working in the healthcare industry or teachers, for example, that those people likely should get a booster shot out of excessive caution. The second thing that this panel said is that the evidence just isn't there yet as to if these boosters will really help people who do not fall into one of those groups. The government of Israel, for example, pointed to certain data that seemed to indicate that the booster shots had helped slow the spread of COVID in Israel. But Israel's a very different country from the United States, much more homogeneous and much smaller. And what's more, the data that they have from Israel is from a very short period, and subsequent data seems to cast some doubt on that earlier data. So the argument of the scientists on this panel was, we need to wait and see. We need to get more data to give us information as to whether it is advisable to get a booster shot or not. Remember, although these vaccines are extremely safe, the risk of taking them is not zero. There is always some risk when you put anything in your body. Now, that being said, the risk that they represent is far lower than the risk that you have if you don't get vaccinated. And that's where the vaccines make sense. But if the booster shots don't actually help, then we probably shouldn't take them, because then you're exposing yourself to unnecessary risk without getting any kind of commensurate benefit. Now, the panel did not say that at some point they might not change their view and argue that there should be boosters offered to all adults here in the United States. But to make that kind of recommendation, the panel needs more data. Now, that might be frustrating for many of us who want clear answers quickly. But unfortunately, sometimes when you're dealing with science's exploration of the unknown, you can't get that. When we are dealing with difficult decisions as to what we should be injecting into our bodies or not, I would much rather that the scientists took their time to consider their options rather than rushing to judgment simply because of the fact that people are impatient and it's politically expedient to provide a clear answer. The difference here, and this is where I think credit should be given to the Biden administration, is that they're willing to respect the opinions of these experts. Science should be what guides our response to this pandemic, not our fears or our impatience or our desires to be done with it as quickly as possible. That's when we make mistakes and people get harmed. And this is where I think the Biden administration deserves credit, because unlike the prior administration, which would have berated the scientists for not going along with what they wanted to hear, the Biden administration instead appears to be accepting the guidance and taking it into consideration as it crafts its response to the pandemic going forward. This is what we want our leaders to be doing, to be taking good information and building upon it, not simply being driven by emotions without any kind of basis in reality. So if you're concerned and frustrated and disappointed with the information that's coming down as to whether boosters will be given or not, well, join the club. Scientists feel the same way. They want more data. They want more information that makes the answer clearer. But the one thing they don't want to do is make a recommendation until it's clear that it will deliver some type of value that's far in excess of any kind of risks that people will incur by getting the booster shots. And once again, as the panel pointed out, the real answer to dealing with this pandemic is to get the unvaccinated vaccinated. And their continued intransigence on that point is really what is causing this pandemic to continue. The problem is not so much whether the vaccines that were originally given to people across the country are less effective than they were when they were first given. Well, if you agree with me or disagree with me, or if you have any questions or comments about this, I'd love to see your comments down below. And if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, that'd be a huge help. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.